going to show up. The presentation's going to be up there too at some point. Okay, perfect. All right, everybody on the phone can hear me at this point too, Angela? All right, thank you very much. All right, with the time being 1:37, we will call the July 16th, 2025 STRGBA GSA Management Actions Workshop to order and into session. Thank you everybody for joining us. Sorry for the delay. Had a little bit of an issue with the Zoom. Wanted to make sure everybody on the phone could participate in the meeting and hear all the presentations. Here in the room, starting on my left, with the City of Oakdale, we've got Jeff Roberts. To my left, Christy McKinnon with Stanislaus County. To my right is Jesse Franco with MID. I am Eric Thorburn with Oakdale Irrigation District. To Jesse's right is Tim Barahona with the City of Modesto. And the far end is Darren Smallin with the City of Riverbank. City of Waterford will not be in attendance. Mike wasn't able to make it. But we have a quorum. Moving right on to item number 2. So business from the public. At this time, interested persons are welcome to introduce any topic within the GSA's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the GSA at this meeting. It is not required, but speakers may provide their name and address. Public comments will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. So we will open it up for public comment. Seeing none in the room. Anybody on the phone? Okay, thank you very much. Move right on to item number 3. Yeah, my mic's on. So these are the management actions. It's a discussion and presentation on draft groundwater allocation recommendations. We've got Dominic Amador from Woodard and Curran here to make a presentation. We're going to hold questions till the end and let Dominic get through this entire presentation. Then we'll have some discussion at the end. Although the agenda notes this as an approval item, there will be no action taken at this meeting. Dominic? It's not up for Zoom either right now, right? Okay. Okay. We'll hold off for a little bit. Just want to make sure people on Zoom can see it, so. Thanks, Melissa. they're going to be able to see the
Yep,
presentation.
can hear you.
Okay, I'll just recap
Okay,
real quick.
okay.
Okay, so people on the phone, it sounds like weren't able to catch the beginning of the meeting, but we have Jeff Roberts with the City of Oakdale, City of Modesto, Tim Barahona is here, Darren Smallin with City of Riverbank, Eric Thorburn, I am here from Oakdale Irrigation District, Jesse Franco's here from MID, and Christy McKinnon's here from Stanislaus County. We have a quorum. We had no business from the public. Do you want to go through, open it up for items that are not on the agenda? Let's do that just one more time for those on the phone in case there's anything that they want to discuss publicly that's not on the agenda.
And there are no hands raised.
Okay, perfect. So we'll move right into item number 3, which we hadn't started yet. This is Dominic Amador from Woodard and Curran. He's going to talk about management actions and specifically about draft groundwater allocation recommendations. The agenda has it noted as an approval and action item. It's not an action item. This is discussion only, so no action will be taken at this meeting. We'll hold questions to the end, and with that, I'll let you take it away, Dominic.
Is it up on the listing?
Here we go.
Awesome, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
As Eric said, my name is Dominic Amador. I'm with the engineering firm Woodard and Curran. Over the past several months, we've been working with a subcommittee of the GSA board to develop a groundwater management program. Today, I'm hoping to particularly focus in on a potential allocation program that we've been developing and hopefully hear a lot of your feedback and comments so that we can refine this thing and get a program that works for everybody. So with that being said, today we have a pretty packed agenda. I do have a couple slides I just want to bring for anybody who has not been fully involved over the past several years. I want to give a very brief background to the GSP and kind of what brought us here to the development of this program today, and then we'll get into the details of our potential allocation framework. I'll give an introduction, talk about some of the regulatory dynamics behind it, really then get into some of the management decisions that have been recommended by the GSA board, and then ultimately I'm excited to be able to walk through an example program with you, show you some of the numbers that we've developed, and then ultimately hear a lot of your feedback. So then to dive into that background, the first thing I wanted to do is give you kind of a brief background as to kind of what brings us here today. And so starting in about 2017, 2018, we began the development of the Modesto Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan. That was a multi-year effort, and we submitted that plan to DWR in January of 2022. That plan went into a lot of detail about the status and long-term planning and management of the basin, but one of the major components to this, particularly related to management actions, is that DWR gave us an incomplete determination when they reviewed the initial plan. Particularly, I want to bring the item deficiency number 2 that you can see here on this slide as a comment from DWR that states that the GSP did not include sufficient details related to projects and management actions to mitigate overdraft and provide a feasible path towards sustainability. So at the beginning of 2024, we went through developed a revised GSP really to focus in on the 2 main items that we've been having these workshops for. One was the well mitigation program, and the other are these management actions. And so ultimately, we resubmitted a revised GSP in July of 2024, and then just a few months ago in February of 2025, the GSP overall was approved. And specifically related to this deficiency, DWR said that the revisions that we had included had appropriately planned and managed for these projects and management actions. And so from there, from the GSP, we gave the initial framework as to kind of what the path we were going to take to develop these projects and management actions. And so over the past several months, we've been working towards implementation of those projects. Okay, so specifically looking at corrective action number 2, because this is really where a lot of the basis of this was the idea that the GSA needs the tools to manage groundwater conditions if the projects and conditions do not perform as expected. And so this is a particular item in that in our initial version of the GSP that we originally submitted, we had a lot of great potential supply side projects. We wanted to bring additional water for recharge, for in lieu use, really lean on conjunctive use within the basin to manage our sustainability, to guarantee our sustainability. Unfortunately, there was some uncertainties associated with those projects, and DWR in their determination really focused, and through our coordination with them, really focused on this top line here that you see, is that they said that the management actions need to be our primary tool to guarantee sustainability, which is a little bit of an inverse comparatively to what we had originally said. We were going to focus on developing supply side projects, and then if the efficacy of those projects were not sufficient, we would lean then on management actions. And DWR said we needed to reverse that paradigm and really focus on management actions and supplement those management actions with projects. And one of the main reasons for that is to just simply to account for long-term uncertainty with our planning, particularly related to climate, to hydrology and weather systems. For example, if we starting tomorrow, heaven forbid, came with a major 10-year drought, we need to be able to guarantee sustainability regardless of the hydrology around that. And so we're developing these managements as effectively as this worst case scenario. So kind of as we go through a lot of the details today, just keep that in mind that our goal is to still implement projects. We still are moving forward with that as a sub-basin, but we are setting these management actions kind of as a backstop to reinforce that, to be able to manage that worst case scenario. Okay, and this is kind of just an infographic basically that reiterates a little bit of what I've just said. You'll see kind of there's 2 main items here. Originally in the GSP, we put projects first and we put our management actions second. And that's when, through coordination with DWR, they effectively said that we need to have this reversed, that we need to put things like an allocation program, looking at monitoring and potentially groundwater fees as a means to manage the basin as our primary tool, and then we can supplement that with projects. Okay, so with that background, now we can get into what does this management program look like. So the first thing I want to get into is at least give a little bit of an idea of what is an allocation program in general. And so I think I went over this in a couple slides at our first workshop, but it's been a couple months, so just as a quick refresher. So in general, an allocation program is kind of like a bank account. It gives us a means, we take a whole, basically an entire volume or bucket of water that we have access to, and we equitably distribute that to different users within the basin to make sure that we don't overdraft our account. And effectively what this does is it develops a system of rules and tools that answer kind of these 3 main questions. First, who can take water? How much can you take and when can you take it? And that's the idea is it's at its core, it's simply just a set of rules to outline the kind of those basic goals. And really the purpose of this overall is that we want to make sure that we have sustainability of this basin, so that in a long-term, when we do our long-term planning, we want to make sure that our farmers, our agricultural community have enough water to continue to operate. In addition to that, we want to make sure that the people that live in the basin, our cities and our rural users, you simply have access to water for your personal domestic use and for businesses within the region. In addition to that, we want to make sure that we do not overdraft to a point where it adversely damages our natural environment. And again, focusing on long-term planning, we want to make sure that we're sustainable for our future generations. So with that being said, then I have a quick slide just showing the kind of the legal direction, particularly looking at the SGMA and California Water Code that really grants the GSA the authority to implement such a program. And so I put three excerpts of the California Water Code on here, but basically the 3 of these kind of can be combined to basically saying that the GSA has the authority to manage groundwater conditions, to limit or regulate, and potentially expand extractions from individual wells or users, but that this management and these allocations cannot supersede groundwater rights. And so just as a component, we are not asserting that we're not taking away anybody's right to groundwater, but that there is ability to regulate it. Okay, so now to get into some of the technical details. So as we kind of walk through today, we have a couple main steps that I really wanted to highlight as far as the means in the development of this groundwater extraction program, and really broken into four main parts. The first part is determine the sustainable yield of the subbasin. We did that as part of the GSP process. And this part is effectively has been already completed. It's been estimated that our sustainable yield for the basin is about 267,000 acre-feet per year from a long-term planning perspective. The next step, which I'm going to talk about here shortly, is we need to account for the special considerations for allocatable water. This is kind of basically considered the framework that goes into this program. We're going to go over a couple main components. First, we'll look at the legal exemptions. So SGMA at its core outlines several exemptions. First, SGMA does not apply to federal or tribal lands. It does not manage any existing adjudications, and it does not touch existing developed supplies or water rights associated with that. The first two of those items don't apply to the Modesto subbasin, as we don't have any particularly strong users of federal or tribal use, and this is not an adjudicated subbasin. But we will talk on developed supplies momentarily. The next component for local management is this is where, again, the Modesto subbasin is managed by a GSA. And so SGMA does give us the ability to specifically focus or highlight any specific areas that the GSA wants to manage, or if they do have any of those, do carve out any exemptions. Because we are a locally managed basin, they have the ability to do that. And so I'll go through some of those decisions that have been recommended by the committee to the GSA. Once we go through each of these items, then I will kind of get into the fun stuff, the numbers, at least on the engineering side of things, is we'll then run through an example program where I get to show you how we are allocating that 267,000 acre-feet of sustainable yield that we have, the distribution to all the different users within the basin, and then basically how that maths out. And then finally, what I won't be getting today, and we're going to save for a future conversation, is to looking at really for the framework of this program. How do we adaptively manage this program? What are the potential impacts and triggers that may either escalate or de-escalate it based on its efficacy and our ability to be sustainable in the long term? And so we'll get into those details at a later meeting. Okay, so then diving into some of the decisions, that first section is the legal exemptions. And so SGMA carves out an exemption for developed supply. So developed supply is effectively water that is imported into the basin from another area. This is area managed through human infrastructure or their anthropogenic means. Principally in this basin, what that means is going to be that the vast majority of that is imported water, particularly from Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District. And so any volume of water, surface water supply that they bring into the system is considered a developed supply, and they are the effective owners of that water, and they get to do with it as they wish. In addition to that, we do have some recycled water within the basin from the city of Modesto. And effectively, that water is, again, similar. It's theirs to use, and it cannot be an allocatable resource. In addition to that, I've also outlined this idea of artificial recharge projects. And this is particularly going to come into play when we look at the projects side of our projects and management actions. And these are things that we're in the future, if we do incorporate things like, any potential recharge basins or any efforts that we do to achieve sustainability from a supply side, those are effectively treated as a credit. They are similar to an imported water, and whoever did the recharge of that water has a right to recover that water in the long term. So currently in our basin, the developed supply that is most principal is the water supply from Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District. And specifically, though, what we're going to focus on is the recovery of this developed supply. And so What I mean for that is that there is a fraction of water that is imported by the 2 irrigation districts that is effectively seeps into the groundwater system. So this is any direct seepage from any of their conveyance systems, from Modesto Reservoir, anything to that effect. And so what we have here, as you can see, is a breakdown of those 2 primary components. Conveyance seepage and the canal reservoir seepage is water that is imported into the basin but is lost through their conveyance. They have the right and the legal exemption from SGMA to be able to recover that water. So basically what we're doing is we're earmarking this 44,000 for their use, for their recovery. Which then brings us to some of the local management factors. And again, this is one of the last items that we talked about previously. Again, kind of a brief overview of potential, basically decision factors, and then from a matrix that we can, of what does the GSA have the right, and what have we been working to do to manage the basin. And so some of these include whether we manage this basin at a sub-basin scale or looking at different management zones, how we treat de minimis use, small-scale agriculture, some of the disadvantaged communities within the basin. And these are basically just kind of a list of some potential things that we've been talking through over the past 6 months. And so I'll be going through each of these today. And so with that, before I get into the details of each of those and walk through the kind of the decision tree on how we came to our recommendation to the GSA, is kind of just a general summary. I'm not going to go through each of these right now. We'll revisit this slide momentarily, but just kind of give you a very brief overview of what the recommendation is. You can take a look at this first. Okay. So then diving into the decision tree that we've had over the past several months as part of with the GSA committee, the first of which is, that I'm going to go over, is the idea of what is the basis of our allocation. So allocations are generally distributed in a combination of looking at consumptive use for users, as well as overall pumping. And so our recommendation is to allocate from a volumetric pumping perspective. And so this is, and as opposed to the consumptive use, which is really focused on the amount of water that is not just extracted from the ground, but is really consumed. And so from an agricultural perspective, this is predominantly your evapotranspiration, but from an urban perspective, it would include indoor, outdoor water use. Anything that is then treated and leaves the basin would also be considered a consumptive use. It's our recommendation to allocate based on total volumetric pumping. This is predominantly to align with DWR's regulatory requirements that require us to report the groundwater use within the basin, and so that these can align one-to-one. Now, with that being said, we're working also with looking at how we're going to potentially meter, and even though we're going to allocate or recommending to allocate on a pumping basis, the goal is to still use remote sensing data, so satellite imagery, to do remote metering in order to not have to put meters on individual wells and have that additional cost on your shoulders. So then the next major item is to look at the extent of the allocation program. And so here there's really, again, 2 main points. We can look at allocations on a sub-basin scale, or we can do individual allocation programs for each management zone. So for this purpose, our recommendation is to do a sub-basin-wide allocation program. That means we are equitably distributing the right to pump across the entire sub-basin, but there will be some caveats to that I'll get into momentarily. In addition to that, again, as we can separate things by management zone, but the GSA also has the option to look at any subset of that. We have the option to carve out by looking at districts or water uses, individual institutional boundaries. And in general, the committee has recommended to not do that. So even though we are focused on a sub-basin-wide allocation program, we do want to make sure that we are able to manage the basin effectively at the management zone scale. And so what we're recommending to that effect is the development of what we're calling stewards. And the idea behind this stewardship is that each of the GSA members would effectively be able to manage to do a wide variety of things, including manage their resources within that management area while still being withholden to the overall allocation program. So I have a list here of each of the different agencies that are sitting on the GSA board, and effectively these member agencies and as members of the board would be in charge of implementing their allocation program. So a little bit more on this idea of stewardship and management areas. The real goal for this is to focus on the ability to really dive even deeper on this idea of local management. We want to empower people to make sure that they have the ability to manage within the bounds that are sustainability bounds, but be able to utilize their resources or their allocation to however they feel is most effective and most efficient. Additionally, the idea behind this is within each of these management areas, up as implemented by the stewards, the idea is that we can pool the resources that we have, again, focusing on efficacy there, and do a variety of, take a variety of steps towards assigning credits, or they can facilitate trade between users, between landowners within each of these management areas, and really distribute the allocation however is most beneficial to their users. So then the next major decision that we have is to look at, how do we allocate, particularly how do we proportionalize this allocation overall to the different users within the subbasin? And so there's several main options here. Comparatively to previous ones, we actually have really 4 major components we can decide here. First, there's overlying area, and so in this case, every acre of land within the entire subbasin will be allocated equally to any other acre of land. We can do this by developed acres, and so traditionally this provides an allocation specifically to either irrigated and or municipal use, and so anything that is not actively used or developed would not receive an allocation. We can allocate based on historical use. And so in this case, you look at, we basically create a baseline looking at historical pumping use and then allocate based on that. And the final is what we consider a comprehensive method, which actually kind of takes a little bit of everything into account. This is often what you kind of can see what would occur in an adjudication, although ultimately, and is usually the most complex, it's the most detailed and probably the most robust as far as, meeting our California water rights laws. But with that I said, it is very complex and it's time consuming to set up. And so the recommendation for the committee, particularly given the timeline that we have, to be able to at least take our first steps towards sustainability, is to initiate this program onto one of the first few options, one of the more simplified approaches. That way we can take that first step and then we can refine as necessary. Again, really focusing on that first item of we want to take that simple first step rather than taking, walking towards an adjudication. One of the major reasons why we are recommending overall to look at the overlying area is that it really focuses the allocation into areas that need their groundwater use the most. Going back to the idea of stewardship, it allows the pooling of resources to those users that need it, and to efficiently use that volume of water. And I know this is, and so specifically because this one does have such a strong intertie with exactly how the allocation gets distributed. Once I get to an example, I'll actually show this as 2 separate examples on the same slide. That way we can kind of talk through the details of what would it look like if we did an overlying allocation versus a developed area allocation. So then the next decision point that we have is effectively how do we manage our municipal users? And so similar with the others, we can simply exempt, from a local management perspective, we can simply exempt municipal users to this regulation, let them do as they wish. We can provide them a limited allocation. This is in general what we're recommending, particularly that the goal is to maintain their groundwater use at current historical levels, but also require them to do direct metering as opposed to the remote sensing that we've talked about for some of our overlying users. And then the third option here as well is to simply that that the municipal users would have to fully comply with the allocation program, which would entail some reductions and cutbacks. And particularly the reason for the recommendation for municipal users being kind of what we're considering a limited, or at least kind of capping their groundwater use at historical volumes, is for a couple major points. One is the cities already have to already have to meet some state mandated conservation efforts as part of the state of California's Conservation as a Way of Life program. So they're already being asked to cut back very significantly as part of that program. But as a kind of an inverse to that, we also know that the cities have legally mandated growth and population targets, effectively driving their demand up. And so the balance of those two things is why the committee is recommending that we kind of just keep a consistent water use based on what they have today. In addition to that, we also know that our public agencies are effectively not-for-profit entities, and so that they also within that they have very limited very limited flexibility when it comes to pricing and overall water use. They have to meet their demands from a regulatory perspective. So then when it comes to our recommendations for some of the smaller users, we have both a combination of de minimis and what we call small scale agriculture. So de minimis users are defined as those that utilize less than 2 acre-feet per year of use. So the primary user of this is going to be your private domestic wells. And so in general, similar to the cities, we can give an exempt, limited, or full ruling on how they're going to be managed. And given that they're relatively small use, and the impact that you'd have to small domestic users, the recommendation is to exempt them from any of the allocations and simply let them operate as they have been. On the other hand, we have what we have considered small-scale agriculture. So small-scale agriculture is not concretely defined, but we have seen potentially in other basins, and there's been discussed throughout SGMA, is often users that are above what we consider de minimis use, so above that 2 acre-foot limit. But if there's a limit to acreage, and so often small-scale agriculture can be defined as kind of what we consider maybe a ranchette or something in the 3, 5, 10 acre-feet per year. And so, but given the exemption that we already have for de minimis use, the committee recommends that any small-scale agriculture still be withholden to the groundwater extraction rules. And then the last major management decision and recommendation from the committee is effectively what to do with water accounting, credits, and trading. And so in this case, and what we've seen in several other subbasins that have incorporated these types of programs, is that you can simply prohibit all forms of trading, and you get to use only what your allocation is provided. We can do limited forms of trading, and so basically we would set some kind of conditions or rules associated with that, or we can simply say create a full market related to trading and credits, and just let everybody kind of decide as they wish. The general recommendation is to have what we consider this limited trading and crediting, and basically to maintain that trading and those use of credits so that any trading would have to occur within each of the management zones, and that we have based on what we are calling response actions, which again is going to be focused on our next presentation, in which we're really getting into the details of this, is that some of those rules that under certain conditions that there may be some limitation as set forth by the GSA. So that's something we're actually still working on, those details, and we'll hope to bring that to you at the next meeting. But I did want to just say, at least point this out as a potential item, that overall our goal is to allow trading, allow credits for implementations of projects or other things, and but to have some rules governing that trading program.
Hey, Dominic, make sure you're speaking closer to the mic if you would.
Okay.
People on the Zoom are having a little trouble hearing you. Thank you.
Okay. So as I showed a little while ago, this is kind of a summary of the recommendations from the Management Action Committee to the GSA as a whole for adoption and for feedback from you, the stakeholders. This is simply just again, a summary of summary matrix of those recommendations. Okay. So now that we've gone through the exemptions and some of the local management decisions, the next step is to really dive into the details, dive into the numbers, and really allocate the sustainable yield. And so I'm hoping to walk through an example of this, and we'll let you kind of know what this program could potentially look like. Okay. So similar to the previous slide, showing that the first step is determining the sustainable yield of the subbasin. So again, this was developed as part of the GSP, and what we are estimating as a sustainable yield, which is effectively the volume of pumping that can occur, volume of pumping and use that can occur within the basin, while still meeting our sustainability objectives as set forth by SGMA. That volume is estimated at 260,000 acre-feet per year. And the goal of this is again, it's an average over a long-term period. And so the idea behind that is depending on hydrologic conditions, we expect things like groundwater level, storage, dynamics to fluctuate up and, well, that was maybe a little too close that time. To fluctuate a little, to fluctuate based on local hydrology. But the idea is that in general, we'll have a long-term sustainability, we'll hit our long-term sustainability targets. So with that being said, I do want to point out that overall this analysis and a lot of numbers you're about to see, especially when they're based on historical data, they are looking at the past 10 years of information, so the 2015 through 2024 period. And I want to also note that there are instances where, particularly when we look at some of the agency-based pumping and whether there's appropriate use and the distribution of water, that the numbers overall are based on historical use volumes rather than the exact location of pumping. And the reason for that is because we do have a couple of the agencies where their production wells do not perfectly align with the management areas. And so because of that, if you have use in one management area, but your well is in another management area, we're focusing the distribution of water in this example as the place of use. Okay. So once we have that 267,000 acre-feet of sustainable yield, the first step is to really account for what we consider the special considerations. These are either the legally exempt users or some of the users that, based on the management decisions that the committee has recommended, is really kind of lop that off the top and say, okay, here we already have so we have a special bucket for you, so to speak, and so we want to make sure we account for that. So the first of which is the developed supply. I spoke to that earlier. That's that 44,000 acre-feet of imported surface water that is seeped via the conveyance system or the reservoir within the subbasin. That the irrigation districts have the ability to recover that developed supply. So we're going to take that, put it in a bucket. In addition to that, from a management decision perspective, we also have the de minimis use. Again, it's an exempt from this allocation program. So that's estimated about 13,000 acre-feet, 13,800 acre-feet overall, that use across the entire subbasin. So we want to, again, lop that off the top, put it aside for their use. And then finally, for the municipal users, again, since we're capping their use of groundwater, but not limiting it, we also want to make sure that we kind of take that volume that they have historically used over the past 10 years, again, and put it in a little bit of bucket. So overall, the three of those add up to about 92,900 acre-feet. So again, this is the idea behind that is we start with the 267,000. We cut off the top of that 92,000 for special considerations. We put that in a combination of developed supply and the special classifications that we've decided. And we're left with the remaining 174,100 acre-feet per year. So then the next step is to appropriate that allocation based on the remaining appropriative and overlying users we have within the basin. And the idea behind this is that we take the historical use, again, over that 10-year period. That historical use is about 268,000 acre-feet per year. And we have to, and again, our target is to hit the 174,000 acre-feet from sustainable yield. And in order to do that, if we will proportionally reduce all users within each of those areas by 65% or a cutback of 45%. Sorry, 35%. Okay. So then at that point, we have the goal of that 174,000 acre feet of remaining allocatable water, and we want to make sure that we allocate it equally based on the remaining appropriative and overlying users. So in this case, the remaining non-municipal appropriative users are the two irrigation districts. And so we look at their historical use and we reduce it by that same ratio. We get 18,900 acre feet per year. In addition to that, the remaining is related to overlying use. And so that overlying use is predominantly all the private agriculture within the subbasin. And the idea is we take their historical volume, reduce it by that same ratio, and we get 155,200 acre feet per year. And so to give you an idea of what that means kind of for each management area, again, really focusing on the idea that we have a sub-basin wide allocation program, but we understand that there are different water use and supply dynamics in each of the management areas. And so we wanted to give an example of effectively what that looks like for each of the management areas and really kind of point out a couple main things. And so I'm going to do my kind of initial walkthrough of these numbers with the overlying area table you see here. But as far as the calculations go on the developed supply, you're going to see the same. It's going to be the same process mathematically, but there's going to be one major caveat, and I'll point that out as I go through it. So overall, what you can see here is when we look at the overlying area, if we want to take a look at that table, first is to take a look at the distribution of the acreage across the entire subbasin from each of these areas, and you can kind of see that representation in the first row. From there, we look at the proportionality of that as far as total acres of the subbasin. So we can see the Modesto area is about 43% of the subbasin. Oakdale area is at 22%. The non-district west is about 6%, and the non-district east is 29%. From there, we can take a look at the total overlying allocation. And again, we want to distribute that overall allocation equally across every acre in the subbasin. And so what that means, if we take roughly 0.63 acre feet per acre, so we're taking the overall overlying allocation, that bucket, effectively that green bucket that we had from the previous slide, that 155,000 acre feet, and we proportion that equally to every acre across the subbasin. You can see the total volumes going to each of those areas. And to give you an idea of how does that compare for you personally in each of these areas, and particularly when it comes to the stewardship of the subbasin and of the management areas, you can see the percentage of the total overlying use comparatively to the historical use, and then the reduction that would be required comparatively to your historical use, the reduction that would be required to be able to meet this allocation. And the reason why you'll notice that we don't see similar proportions related to the overall allocation versus a percentage of historical use is simply due to the general water supply from each of these areas. So for example, if you're a grower in MID or OID, you're going to have a supplemental surface water supply. And so in general, per acre, we see less groundwater production in those areas comparatively to the groundwater dominated areas. And so that's where you see that level of reduction required being distributed that way. So again, when it comes to the developed area approach, so this is where we really focused on only providing an allocation to developed areas. There's two main things I really want to focus your attention on. Obviously, the main one that you're going to notice that in general, you're seeing the overlying allocation per acre of developed area, that per acre allocation is greater than looking at the overlying area, right? That's because in general, we're dividing the same volume of water across a smaller group of users. But one of the reasons why the committee recommended utilizing the overlying areas really comes back to the idea of stewardship and the efficient use of resources, because while you'll see certainly that the 1.19 is greater than the 0.63, when it comes to the total volume of allocatable water, you can see that particularly when it comes to the areas that are in need of that water, particularly in this case, looking at Modesto in the non-district east area, the total volume that is going to each of those areas is greater. And so this comes back to the idea of stewardship, and the idea that the goal would be for each of those areas to work together to pool these resources and to provide that allocation to their individual growers, potentially in excess of their overlying volume. Okay, with that being said, then to really kind of get a summary of what does this mean for each of the management areas and the subbasin as a whole. So in general, if you take a look at the first column here, we can see that the overall developed supply is 44,000 acre feet. We touched on each of these numbers earlier. The special cases, so this is the de minimis use and the municipal agencies, is 48 or 49,000 acre feet. We have about 19,000 acre feet of appropriative use from the irrigation districts, and the overlying use is 155,000 acre feet, bringing our total allocation to the sustainable yield of 267,000 acre feet. Comparatively to our historical pumping, which is 317,000 acre feet, you can see that we have a required reduction to achieve sustainability of about 50,000 acre feet subbasin wide, which brings our total allocation, our total reduction as a percentage of the historical use to 84%. So you can see, and then the breakdown of that by each of the management areas. Particularly, you can see that the developed supply, particularly being driven by the recovery of surface water supplies from Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District. Each of that is respectively applied to the Modesto and Oakdale areas. In addition to that, the special cases distributed based on the use of the de minimis and municipal use. Appropriative use, again, being focused on the 2 irrigation districts, and the overlying use being distributed across each of the, proportional to the total acreage to each of the management areas. And so and you can see here as well, you can see the total reduction required from each management area based on this distribution. So overall, we can see that sustainability in general, remember, can be met with management actions. Again, just remember, this is what we're considering our worst case scenario. The goal of this is to be able to incorporate projects and to alleviate as much of this program as possible. But we do, but DWR has basically said we must create this backstop for that worst case scenario. And that's effectively what we have presented here. And so again, our goal is to be able to offset as much of this as possible, to put as much burden on our growers as possible. Beyond that, we also want to make sure that we are truly optimizing our water resources within the basin. And so that's why we're developing that stewardship program for each of the management areas. And so, and based on that, the goal is to be able to mitigate mitigate the impacts of these programs, again, pooling the resources that we have to be able to get water to those who are who need it most. And so as an example of that, one of the things from the previous slide that you'll notice is that particularly the Oakdale and the non-District West areas have a potential allocation in excess of their historical use. And so one of the discussion items that the committee has been working through over the past few months is really, well, how to optimize that resources, right? If a management area or if a user does not need their full allocation, then we certainly want to make sure that we can utilize that in an effective and efficient manner. And so the goal of this is to really make sure that as a potential, something that we could do is reallocate some of that unused allocation water to other users that would otherwise have to curtail their use. And so with that being said, I do want to make sure I add the caveat to something like this is that in general, the agencies that have an allocation or the users that have this allocation, it would be up to them to whether or not they want to participate in this potential reallocation. And so particularly when it comes to things like developed supplies from the irrigation districts, that they have an exemption from SGMA for that developed supply. And so if they do have an excess use of water, that allocation is still ultimately under control. But as an example of of all of the agencies, water purveyors, the GSA as a whole, right? The goal is to work together and to really mitigate as much of this program as possible. And so as an example of that, I wanted to walk through an idea of how we can redistribute some potential unused allocations to other areas that may need it. And so as an example of that, one you can see here, particularly, again, as I said, the Oakdale and non-district west areas, based on the previous slide, have an over allocation comparatively to their historical use. And so one of the examples that we walked through was, okay, well, what if we effectively take the excess allocation that is otherwise unused, so 18,900 acre feet from the Oakdale area and 300 acre feet from the non-district west, and what if we redistributed those volumes to keep those two agencies or those two management areas whole, but to then get any of that excess allocation to those who are otherwise are looking at cutbacks. And so in this example, and again, this is just as an example, we have redistributed that allocation, so that approximate 19,000 acre feet. What I've done is I've redistributed based on their historical use. And so that's why you'll see the proportionality is related to the total historical pumping. If you kind of look here on the sort of the 173,000 from the Modesto area and the 89,000 from the non-district east as being the two management areas that are looking at reducing their groundwater production. And so proportional to those two numbers, we've redistributed the excess allocation of 19,000 acre feet to 12,600 to the Modesto area and 6,600 to the non-district east. And again, it's just proportional to their historical use. And so what that does is that actually brings what we're kind of calling an optimized allocation and use within the basin. And it hopefully reduces the reduction required to be able to meet the overall allocation program. Require a reduction in the Modesto area of 11,700 acre feet, and would also improve the reduction required in the non-district east to just under 40,000 acre feet. Okay, so now that I've gone through kind of a brief overview of what the long-term targets for an allocation program are, we certainly want to make sure that we don't just levy this burden on everybody instantly. And we are, again, focusing that our goals overall is to create that worst case scenario, that backstop that DWR is requiring of us, right? We are mandated that we have a management action that is the primary tool to guarantee sustainability. But we also want to acknowledge that, our goal is to bring in enough projects and to incorporate enough projects within the basin to offset as much of this as possible, if not all of it. And so that's our ultimate goal, but we acknowledge that there's going to be kind of a balancing act, right, between implementation, bringing those projects online, right? It takes time to build major capital supply projects. And so there's a timeline associated with that. And then there's equally a timeline associated with, implementing any potential curtailments or allocations. And so as a goal, right, this is a general framework towards sustainability in that worst case scenario. And so as we take steps towards that, we want to make sure that we take first a meaningful step forward, but to take a conservative step forward, right? We understand that a lot of the assessment here is an estimate based on long-term climate, hydrology, and modeling data. And we understand that there's uncertainty with that. And so we want to make sure that we take a meaningful step forward, but we don't, we're not going to just set targets that everybody has to abide by simply by the development of the model. We can set long-term planning goals with the model, but ultimately we are managing the basin with observed data, right? So right now, twice a year, we report to the state groundwater levels and how we compare to our interim milestones, our minimum thresholds, and our measurable objectives, right? That's this timeline that you see here on the right. And so the goal of this is really to adaptively manage the basin to adjust these allocations over time as we fill data gaps, as we test efficacy, and implement those projects ultimately, right? Again, because our goal is long-term is to be able to offset as much of this as possible. And so with that in mind, we want to make sure that I at least cover effectively a few of the interim milestones, the timeline that we have to achieve our sustainability. And so overall, long-term, Sigma must be achieved and sustainability must be achieved by 2042. That's when our goal is to hit the measurable objectives. That's our highest point on this timeline. But we have some time until then. And so what you can see based on this figure here is that we have committed to DWR that by 2027, we will completely arrest overdraft of the basin. So basically, we hit our low point of our groundwater and storage level declines in the next 2 years. By 2032, so 5 years after that, our goal is to return to our minimum thresholds. And then 5 years beyond that is to be halfway between our measurable objectives and our minimum thresholds. And so you can kind of see the timeline curve here on the right-hand side. And so in order to achieve that, we certainly know that levying all this on you right away is going to be quite an undertaking. And so because of that, we have to, in order to hit these goals, we're estimating really 3 main points. So that one is starting in 2027, when we have to completely arrest overdraft. Our goal is to target about 50% of this overall allocation program. And then at each the 5-year increments beyond that, the goal is to target 75% of the allocation program and 100% of the allocation program. And again, what this does is this gives us time to implement the program, to bring on some of those projects that we're hoping to offset this and test the efficacy of this program at all and make adjustments as necessary. So what does this mean for each of the different management areas? Because that's kind of how we've broken things down, particularly on the reduction, is that in general, first thing you can see comparatively to the previous summary slide that I had, is when it comes to particularly the Oakdale and the non-district west areas, that the allocation program, once fully implemented, they are within their allocation production overall, and so that they don't have a reduction target to hit over those next 15 years. And so the goal behind that is that while they still will not be able to exceed their overall allocation if their groundwater use continues as it has in the past, over the past 10 years, that they will not have to reduce over the implementation period. On the other hand, when it comes to the Modesto area, we do have an overall reduction target of one of 2 options. We see here on the kind of in the middle column, you'll see the base reduction, and that's without the optimized reallocation of unused allocation or unused water. And then we have an example for the optimized reduction. And so you can see here that the goal is to hit about on the bottom line is to hit 24,000 or 11,000 acre feet, depending on the implementation and the potential reallocation of water to hit those reductions. But with those reductions being about 14 or 7% of historical use, the goal is to hit about approximately 50% of that in the by the first 5 years of the program, which again starts in 2027, to increase that to 75% of their reduction between 2033 and 2037, and then ultimately by 2038 to 2042 in order to be able to hit our targets in 2042 to be at full implementation scale. And so the only other items you'll note is that our target is that 50%, 75%, and 100%. And when you can see here, some of these curtailments, they're rounded a little bit, right? So for example, that middle one, 10% is not 75% of 14, but we're simply rounding it to a whole number for ease of math. Okay. So then when it comes to the non-district east area, we abide that by the same general rules as we're applying to the Modesto area. So here again, if we look at our general base reduction, you can see an overall goal reduction by 2042 of 50%, which is 45,500 acre feet. Under the optimization scenario, as an example, we can reduce that to about 43% reduction, or that 38,900 acre feet by 2042, excuse me. And the implementation schedule of that for that, because again, we need to take a meaningful step towards these programs, but acknowledging that, acknowledging those uncertainties that we have moving forward and the efficacy of the program. We want to take a meaningful step, but we do not need to take the full step. We're trying to take a conservative approach to this. The goal is to target 50% over the next 5 years, starting in 2027. 50% is a 25% reduction during that time period, which is increased to a 40% reduction in 2033 and the ultimate total reduction of 50 or 43% in 2038 to the 2042 period. Okay. And so this is actually a kind of a summary of those previous 3 slides, particularly when it comes to, that we kind of just look on it at one section here. You can kind of see the distribution for both the base version as well as the optimized scenario of looking at the reduction comparatively to historical use that would have to be incurred by each of the management areas over each of those 5-year periods for each of them in different management areas. And so you can see the difference here that overall that the subbasin as a whole has to reduce by approximately 22% under the base use and 16% under the optimized scenario. And then kind of just concluding, we're going to bring us back to this slide we talked about earlier. And again, the overall idea is that we don't want, we have to take that meaningful first step. We do not want to be overly conservative with this approach. We want to give ourselves time to assess the conditions, to assess this program, to be able to offset of this as much as possible. But we are mandated by DWR, by the state of California, to have this program in place to, to really be that backstop, to be able to guarantee our sustainability of the basin. And so the goal behind this is that we developed some targets. We're going to assess conditions over time, particularly by looking at the monitoring network that we have within the basin, continue to fill some of the data gaps, both in our monitoring and just simply in the uncertainties associated with climate and our understanding of the hydrogeology and the conditions within the basin. To make some of those refinements, particularly when it comes to our periodic evaluation, which is scheduled to start in the next couple of months. And so we're going to continue to fill those data gaps to assess that uncertainty, to bring projects online, to again offset this as much as possible. But we do want to make sure that we have that target and we're taking those first meaningful steps towards sustainability. Awesome. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominic. So a lot of information there to absorb. Want to give the member agencies a chance to comment or ask Dominic any questions they have. Anyone? All right. Then we will open it up to the public for public comment and questions. Right, Melissa's right behind you. There's a mic up here. Want to make sure that we're speaking into the.
No. You can either go to the podium or I can run the mic around.
Yep.
So,
Just so that people on the phone can hear everything. Yeah, thank you.
Louis Briquetto. Hey, I'd just like to have this gentleman's contact so we could address the errors and omissions in this report, and he could have more input. So I don't know if you have a card.
I'm okay with you. Yeah, if you want to give them your contact information, that's fine. Any questions you get, I want to make sure
I'll send them to you.
yeah, so that we can just make sure we're managing our consultants' time effectively. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, thank you. John Doherty, in-district user, out-of-district user, 6706 Dusty Lane. Already the recipient of several bomb threats, so if you want to find me there, go ahead. Couple things I disagree with on this. One is the municipal users only having limited restriction under the allocation of this. We've got cities all through this subbasin. Waterford, Oakdale, Riverbank, Salida, all through the subbasin, who've recognized in their urban water management plans for decades now that they need to find surface water sources to combine with the groundwater sources for long-term sustainability. Many of them have done nothing. The cities are pushing out surface irrigated orchards. Each one of these cities is pushing out surface irrigated orchards today to put in groundwater supplied homes. This is ridiculous. We can do better, and one of the lowest cost options we have here in terms of economic impact is to get surface water from the Modesto treatment plant or the treatment plant up north into these cities. And it should be a priority, and we need to use the authorities under SGMA and this committee to do so. So that's first thing I've got. Next one I've got is the allocation based on the full non-district east area versus the developed area. This county made a decision in 2015 to put through a well moratorium to stop or greatly curtail the development of land in the non-district east area to the footprint that's already there. As you start ratcheting down the allocations to non-district east horticultural growers, irrigated pasture, irrigated farmers, and you have a very unclear and unsecure water trading allowance, exactly how water credits can go, you're not just going to cut the growers with horticultural crops out there by 10 or 20 or 15%. You're going to cut us by 50% or 60% because you've spread the allocation over the entire basin, over the entire non-district east area. I strongly encourage you to spread the allocation for the non-district east area over current irrigated farmlands, not the rangeland that was never developed. It may have the wrong soils. It may just not be the business strategy of that family or that entity to develop it, but it will concentrate the water that is allocated to the horticultural growers out there. And it's taken us a long time. We've been to a number of these meetings, and I've criticized them in a couple forums because we talk about well replacement strategies for hours. We never have time to present this information that's the most critical information. And now we present it with really no economic impact whatsoever with the information. We know that south of the Tuolumne, the Turlock Irrigation District East area, we're going to lose tens of thousands of acres. We can pretty much presume here, and I'm thankful that OID and MID are attempting or have stepped up to make some water available to North District East growers, but we know here if this is implemented in 2027, and the only allocation growers have that currently farm on the east side is spread out over all the rangeland that's not developed, basically a 3-to-1 rangeland to horticultural area. They're not going to be able to scramble in time. They're not going to be able to get the banking in time. They're not going to be able to come up with a financial plan to buy any water credits, and nobody knows what the rules on water credit trading are. Then we're saying that Modesto Irrigation District can recharge the basin from a reservoir on the east side of the district and credit their consumption way on the west side of the district. They can pump in Modesto City 30,000 acre feet a year and through the district another substantial amount of water a year while they recharge way out on the east side, but you haven't facilitated a transfer of unused groundwater credits from west side growers to east side users. And that's not been developed, and we're going to make major curtailments here in 2027, the year after next. And I can tell you most of the horticultural growers right now, whether they're walnuts, almonds, pistachios, we're on our heels. Wine grapes, we're on our heels. There are no financial resources to go flipping over rocks with the rangeland owners on the east side to figure out where to buy the water credits to keep our farms working. There may not be the resources to put in the $500,000 infrastructure improvements or $1 million infrastructure improvements in this time frame to keep the irrigated crops going. And I can tell you, if the farm credits or the county supervisors were in this room right now and had a clear understanding of what you're telling us, there would be a local financial crisis throughout this county right now. And we would be talking to the sheriff, the public safety, the human health services, every county agency right now, as well as the local financing groups, would be having a conniption. Please understand the seriousness of what you're doing, and please work harder to minimize it, the impact of it. And so thank you very much.
Dominic, before we go on to the next person, can you go back to that slide that you had for the overlying versus developed area? It sounds like there's some confusion there. Just want to make sure I understand his point.
Which slide?
The two where you have the overlying table and the developed, yeah. So can you walk through that number a little bit more for him to understand? Because what he was saying, I think he's advocating for more supply for the non-district east.
What I'm
by
asking
doing,
for, sorry, is the non-district east area, your total overlying area is 44,000.
acre feet, 44,200 acre feet,
Well, what is the total non-district east area?
70,000 acre feet,
How many?
70,000 acres.
So there's 70,000 acres. So as I understand it, we're allocating the non-district east allotment of groundwater extraction to the 70,000 acres equally, whether it's developed or not. And I'm saying allocate the same amount of water, but for those who've never taken water in the non-district east area
Right.
and who can't even drill a well, why are you gonna allocate them water that could be concentrated on the horticultural producers that are already taking water and dependent on it?
Yeah.
You're gonna cause more
So
financial
let me
chaos and
explain for
uncertainty
you,
than
I
needed.
understand what you're saying. So what's happening here is, we're saying to allocate the 44,200 acre feet to the non-district east. And previously, in the previous slides, we talked about the management of that allocation being done in the management area. So in this approach, you would get 44,200 acre feet to utilize however that management area decided to use it. Whether it's,
Political entity in the management area that's gonna make that decision, it's not your authority. How and who and what is the political authority in the non-district east area that's gonna take that ball and by 2027 come up with an answer?
yeah, Stanislaus County in the non-district east. It's a Stanislaus County.
So the county supervisors.
Yeah, Stanislaus County, correct?
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Again, economic impacts, this is devastating.
Yeah, and this approach would reduce that, just to make sure you're understanding it correctly. Anyone else? Okay. If you want to just call them out by name, go for it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I'm Irmani, EKI Environment and Water. I appreciate the opportunity to comment and also appreciate all the work that went into this and the presentation. I have a couple questions, but I'm happy to raise my hand to just respect the process. So my first question goes, I know it was checked off on the presentation that it was done the GSP, but basically the starting number for the allocation that comes from the sustainable yield estimation. And that drives the whole allocation amounts, right? So it's an important number. My question is like allocation is not a new concept. It's being done in Central Valley, at least in two sub-basins right now, in Kui and Tule. And there are other basins that are working with it. All of them use current information. So as was presented in the allocation, almost everything else in the allocation program is based on 2015 to 2024 data that's known and the current operations that known. The sustainable yield number is a projection. It comes from a model simulation. It has specific assumptions to it that we may agree or disagree on. Basically, it puts the sole cause of undesirable result on one area, non-district east management area, which based on the allocation that was just presented, it's not true because the Modesto sub-basin had to reduce their allocation as well. So my comment, and this might not really, I'm not expecting the sustainable yield to move significantly from this number, but I would like a bit more elaboration on why the allocation is using this number instead of current long-term, pumping minus the overdraft, and then reduce that overdraft to zero by the end of the time that we have to be sustainable based on Sigma. Thank you for the time.
So one of the reasons why we are looking at forward projections is really to focus on the uncertainty associated with the future, right? So throughout our modeling exercises and the research that we've done over the development of the GSP is, there's uncertainty with, again, climate, hydrology, and overall conditions. And our goal is not just to be able to look at historical pumping, which we know has been in long-term decline, which we can see from observed groundwater level data, but the combining that overdraft with the uncertainty and what Sigma has projected, right? Because overdraft is not a single number. The goal under any conditions, right? We have wet years and we have dry years, and Sigma gives us a very defined set of conditions, particularly related to groundwater levels, to stream aquifer interaction, to overall storage. And we need to make sure that we hit all those targets regardless of the hydrology of any given year. And so in order to be able to assess those conditions under, as we project in the future and as we hit those targets in the future, we need to be able to rely on some of the tools that we have to be able to quantify those assessments.
But I think that's another reason why we're starting off at 50% and a lower number so that we're a little more conservative, and then we're basing our decisions from there on out on real data that we're collecting on the field.
Absolutely.
Right. Was somebody else on the phone?
Yes. Oops.
It's okay. We'll get back to you. Yep.
Okay. All right, next caller is Jaren. You can unmute your phone.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm Jarin Taslim Anika. I'm from UC Cooperative Extension, and I'm working with the small scale farmers across Merced, Stanislaus, and San Joaquin counties under the program of ERCTA, which is by the Department of Water Resources. We basically provide technical assistance to the underrepresented tribes, community, and small scale farmers. So I have a comment on the recommendation of abiding by all agricultural use rules and regulation by the small scale farmers. So the small scale farmers I basically work with have less than 50 acres of land. They share land and they grow mixed vegetables like strawberries and other seasonal vegetables in a particular area where probably the landowner is one, but there are multiple tenant growers working on the same farms. So, and they, like our organization also interacted with some data set of crop water use compared to almond, walnut, and other orchard crops. And we found out that the water used by the small scale farmer is significantly lower than them. Since it is not published, so it will not be appropriate to share the data right now, but it's significantly lower. And in terms of their technological advancement and the stage of getting information on Sigma. So I drove around all the counties that I am covering, and unfortunately the small scale growers did not receive any outreach on Sigma. So they are still learning about Sigma, and I think I'm the first person who introduced them to Sigma. And in a lot of the GSS, they have already implemented different types of allocations, different types of groundwater, water estimation tools, and also groundwater accounting platforms. I believe these are very advanced level information to be absorbed by the small scale farmers within limited time and without having assistance with different organizations, including the GSS. And of course, there are outreach gaps that I have already identified in the field. So given this situation, I would like to request the team that maybe we should focus on more study on the small scale farmers, their situation, and then maybe we can work on exemption of the rules and regulations or fees or allocation, or maybe we should take more time in implementing those rules and regulation on those small scale farmers. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Sir.
Good afternoon, Anthony Ratto, Ratto Brothers. Primarily focus at Tim and Jesse on this 24,000 acre foot number. Without pointing the finger directly at each other, who's gonna take this on right here? And do you guys have any thoughts on that as we sit here today?
Good question, Mr. Ratto. Obviously, I think it's a partnership, right? So I don't know that we've got full details explained or set out. Again, this is the kind of the framework. So this is basically showing where we're at, snapshot. Where do we make adjustments? So now we know we have to make adjustments. I think we've got some, ideas that the city and district have been working on, but now it's like more than ever, it's working collaboratively to figure out how are we going to address this this shortfall. I'm sure the city has some ideas, district obviously has some ideas, but now it's sitting at the table and figuring out how these ideas converge and how do we maximize our efforts.
Hi, Alexandra Duarte here. So for Eric, just a clarification on what you were saying. On the slide that says 3B, Summary of Overlying Water Use, there's a box that says per overlying area and per developed area. What it sounded like is if you look at the NDE area, if we went with the overlying area, there'd be an allocation of 0.63 overlying allocation. If we went with the developed area, which is what John brought up, would have 1.9. And so then it sounded like you were saying, well, each area would get the ability to use the water as they chose after it was allocated. But these look like it's a one or the other as per the groundwater allocation overview, where we looked at the choices of pro rata allocation as overlying, developed, or historical. And this looked like it was comparing the two.
Can you,
So,
would you mind pulling up that slide again?
It should be up. Can we pull up the slide, please?
I don't have page
Sorry.
numbers. It's
There we go.
here
Okay,
it is.
so
3D.
yeah.
So
this
yeah,
is-
it sounded like,
Yeah, no,
we
give
had
me,
a
give me a
choice of
second, I'll
per
walk you through this
overlying,
real quick, yep.
per
So
developed.
see the per overlying area there?
Yes.
So the total acres of the non-district east area is
Yep.
70,000 acres. And then on the right, the per
Yep.
developed area, the irrigated area is 24,000 acres. So when you take the total of that overlying allocation, 155, 200, see that 4 cells down on the left?
Yeah,
That total allocation, and you divide it, you take that and you apply it to that percentage of the basin, it's 29% of the basin on the left, on the overlying area table. So you're allocating that 155 over 70,000 acres, so that's 0.63 acre feet per acre, because it's more acreage. But because you're 70,000 acres, you're getting 44,200 acre feet applied to that area. And if you do the same on the right, you're taking 155,000 acre feet and you're allocating 18%. And so you're getting 28,000 acre feet, 28,700 acre feet. Does that make sense? It's
the
because of the
overlying
different
yeah.
different
Okay.
acreage with the same amount of water.
okay.
And so the total quantity is more if you use the overlying area. And then
Yeah.
at that point, we distribute that to the management area.
Yep.
And then it's up to that management area to determine what they do with that water.
Thank
So we propose to use the overlying area
Okay, I have,
in this draft.
yeah, no, that
Yeah.
makes sense. I have one more math question on the
Uh-huh.
allocation summary. So that was a brown chart. Can you pull up this one?
I've got it.
Yeah. So why don't the numbers add up? I know I'm missing something here, but when I have to go back and look at this later, why don't your sub-basin totals, why aren't they a total of all the areas? Because if you look at the reduction required of 50,600, 24 and 45 don't equal 50,600. Do you see what I mean? And the reduction required row.
Yes. They should be, but let me I can
Okay.
double check and get back to you.
That was it. Thank you.
You're saying a Modesto area is slightly off? Is that the one you're looking at? The 173 and 24,000? Is that what you're looking at?
The reduction required says 50,600
some of this row.
Oh, the
She's only
first one.
45 and 24.
24 and
It's-
45 don't equal 50. So we don't understand why the subbasin total would be the total of the different areas of the subbasin.
Oh, the bottom row, the reduction required row.
Or can I make a comment to her
Yeah.
first comment? So the other, one thing I wanted to add on, if we can get the slide deck back up, is on the 3B slide. And so one of the things, when we were evaluating these two options here, and that it's a little bit harder to see, is it kind of comes back to the idea of the optimization of use. And so in each of these, when looking at each of these options, the goal is to really be able to give as much area, but to give the stewardship or stewards as part, or each of the management areas, the biggest bucket that they can to distribute to their growers, right? And so in this case, for example, you pointed out, I get my mouse, right? Like you pointed out this 155 use divided by the 70,000 is of the 44. And, you know, certainly we use this 0.63 to allocate only to the management area as a whole, not to individual growers, like for their fields. And so here, as you kind of take an example to this, is if you distribute the 144 to the irrigated acreage, right, to the growers that are actively using it, which I believe is both your and John's comment. If you divide that 144 comparatively to this 24, right, to your active users, that ratio is just under 2 acre-feet per acre. And so the goal, right, so that would be the next step would be for the non-district east area through the Stanislaus County to make sure that the water gets to the growers that need it. So this step is really just giving it to the management area or to the steward, in this case, the county. And then the next step would be to have the county be able to allocate the specific volumes to their growers. And hopefully we can get that full volume of allocation to those who need it and, you know, improve, and hopefully, even though we're giving the county the distribution of as an overlying area, that the growers that need the water, that use the water, can get the allocation, can get the 2 acre-feet, rather than simply allocating directly to developed users. You only get the 1.19.
Thank you. Excellent. Could that be a recommendation within the report to do it that way?
It can be, that would be up to the GSA or the county.
I have a question on that too then. All right, sorry. No, it's fine. Nicholas Chase. So like if we decided to allocate either way, let's say we had decided to allocate with the overlying areas, would the whole entire GSB have to follow the same rules and have to allocate all their water, even in OID, to all landowners? Or could Stanislaus County on their own decide we're going to only allocate, even though we're doing the overlying area, we're only going to allocate our water to current users of the water and not all that extra land that's sitting in the east?
That'll be up to the steward to decide.
So the stewards can decide separately on the way they want to use their water, depending on, and it doesn't matter how it's allocated.
Well, we have to agree as the GSA how we're gonna allocate the water to the different steward agency groups.
Mhm.
But then once that is agreed upon, the stewards will determine how the water will be allocated to the landowners within the boundaries.
Hello, I'm Eric Kane. I'm a Modesto resident, urban usage only. I've always had a question about seepage at the Modesto Reservoir and never got an answer, but is the water inside the reservoir, does that belong to the city of Modesto? Who owns it? Or does anybody own it?
So the water within Modesto Reservoir, if I'm understanding your question correctly, so Modesto Irrigation District diverts water from off 12 River from Don Pedro through LaGrange, diverts it through our conveyance system to Modesto Reservoir. That pool of water, if you will, is then distributed to our farmers and then also distributed to the domestic water treatment plant. So it's twofold. It's to provide surface water not only to our growers, but also to the city of Modesto for domestic use.
So it's based on water rights.
Right, so, yes, correct. So MID
So-
holds that water right.
The question is, if I understand it correctly, there's 23,800 acre feet of seepage?
Based on that slide, that's correct.
Is that correct? Who does that water belong to?
Again, it would go back to the district.
Well, if someone had a crop around that reservoir and nearby and were pumping groundwater onto that crop, does MID get paid for that?
No, not directly. No, not unless there was an agreement off, that we had a diversion point off of there.
Well, it's my understanding from talking to hydrologists and geologists that that's what happens. And it's also my understanding, and also based on either the Scott River or Smith River decision, that when you have pumps near a river, that you're pumping out of the river. Is that kind of reduction and improvement of someone's groundwater accounted for in this analysis?
I think you bring up a great question, actually. So if we go back to, can you bring up the slide deck again?
What slide?
What's that? When we talk about the developed supply. So it's not, yeah, there we go. That was it right there. Oh, one back, I think. There we go. So yeah, Dominic, this is developed supply. So this is part of the reservoir seepage that you're talking about. There's also canal seepage.
Yeah, well, not
Oakdale-
canal, there's also, I mean, if you got a pump next to the Tuolumne River, you're pumping out of the river.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great point. So that 12,500 acre feet, for example, that's developed supply from Oakdale Irrigation District bringing in surface water, and that's seepage from our canals. And so the same thing happens with the reservoir, MID's reservoir, and their canal system. And legally, my understanding is that we have the right to that water, continued right to that water. And actually, there are several basins around us, multiple basins, that are charging for that water. So in Turlock, in the Turlock Basin, just south of us, the West Turlock GSA is charging, and the East Turlock GSA is purchasing water from the West Turlock Subbasin, or West Turlock GSA rather, because they recognize that that's water that was developed supply, brought into the basin, it's seeping into the groundwater aquifer, and they're pumping it out. And so they're selling it to them on a transitional basis over, I think, 20 years in that particular instance, I think for $60 an acre foot. And so that's the question that even OID is gonna have to think about, is, we've got a surplus, and we talked about an optimized approach, and, dividing that out and letting other areas around us use that water. Well, OID technically could take the approach of the same approach as the Turlock Basin and sell that water from a legal standpoint. So
But
we
in,
have some questions that we
Modesto
need to answer.
Reservoir, that's MID water.
Yes, the master,
And it
just
says
like
there,
that, it's MID.
recovery of developed supply. So theoretically,
From a legal
MID
standpoint,
could
it's theirs.
recover that seepage
Yeah.
legally?
Yes, that's my understanding, right,
And that might
Dominic?
put a hurt on whoever's pumping the seepage water.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the clarification.
That's why that was one of the buckets we pulled off of the total amount to begin with,
Oh,
because it's legally protected, yeah. Uh-huh.
The point you and the gentleman were just making, in combination with the comment you had at the Oakdale meeting we had a few weeks ago, where one of the gentlemen in the audience asked, hey, why don't we just run the Modesto Reservoir at its full capacity, 28,000 acre feet, instead of 20,000 acre feet where it typically resides now? You would create another, I imagine, if I'm allowed to imagine, 5,000 or 10,000 acre feet of seepage, and you would have, believe me, many North District East growers who would be very happy to buy that water from Modesto Irrigation District at a $60 per acre foot price with no infrastructure requirement it would be a hell of a solution if MID were just run that reservoir as full as you can and allocate that extra seepage to North District East growers at a price, and it doesn't involve Modesto's delivery infrastructure downstream. If it could be in the $60 range, if it could be in the $100 range, it would be very attractive compared to some of the wranglings we're having in Modesto Irrigation District now. Thank you.
Can I go back for clarification?
Sure.
Alex, I just wanted to come back to your comment. It took me a moment to think it through, but this table here. So the reason why these two numbers don't add up is because of the potential over allocation, the 174. And so because of that, this 50,000 is based on kind of goes back to the optimized use. It should be the only cell in which that occurs, but because of basically that difference here, you'll notice if you did this and then added also the 18,000 from the theoretical, from this here, the excess, this 50,000 is simply based on what it takes to reduce without the over excess allocation, because this assumption like the two zeros here makes the assumption that someone's simply just not using that water, that it's just, that it's going to be an unused allocation. And so this is more of like an optimized volume, as opposed to these are the, effectively what the allocation would map to.
The base. The base.
The base.
Would you mind coming up to the microphone, just so people on the phone can hear you? Thank you.
So this is a working model, right? It's going to change all the time. If we can implement some of the projects that move more of agriculture onto groundwater, if the GSA has the power to say to new housing developments, you have to use groundwater, your model is going to be updating and things will change all the time. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah, so the model does get updated usually we start to update generally in November, and it gets finished early February every year. And we incorporate not only do we, refine things like land use and, remotely sense ET and things to that effect, right? But we also take into account all the additional urban use, or simply if there's corrections or we fill any data gaps. I believe we had some comments at the last update related to the collection of MID drainage water, right? So there's a lot of different components that we try to keep it as much of a living model as we can. And each and every year we try to refine this. And the goal is to not only just try to update the model from the perspective of just data, but also, as we implement this program and we can test the efficacy of the projects that we have, we can fine tune a lot of these numbers to hit a target and be more accurate in that case.
Yeah, because I know the changes are small sometimes because urban doesn't use as much as agriculture, but it looks like 25% of the North District East will have to be fallowed within 2027 to meet the first target on the graph. And once you've fallowed almond ground, it's not coming back. It's done. So, thank you.
Anyone else?
Just a couple of comments or questions. How would you differentiate the difference between the groundwater that's available at Modesto Reservoir and the seepage that goes in the groundwater? I don't know how you would differentiate that. I'm not so sure. That's one other thing. Just to be clear, I want to be base reduction, optimized reduction. Explain the difference between the two of them to me so I understand it.
Sure. So in this case, the base reduction is effectively what kind of the initial cut from the previous slide, right? That brownish color, orange. Yeah. slide. So in this case, what we did is we wanted to go through an example. We acknowledged that the Oakdale area and the non-district west area had an allocation or a volume that they could pump that they'd never actually, that they didn't have to, right? So basically it was like an unused volume of water. What we hope to do is to be able to develop some kind of program, again, to be determined because it's ultimately owned by each of those management areas, is to take any unused allocation and be able to distribute it to other areas that are having to cut back. So we're trying to mitigate how much they have to cut back.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. That helps me out a little bit. When we show that there's how many acre feet of seepage at Modesto Reservoir or loss or whatever you want to call it?
23,600 of it?
Pardon me?
23,600?
Yeah, okay. How did we come up with that number?
So that's probably a question better for MID, but I think, yeah, sorry, but I think as part of their ag water management plan, they have separate operational models that track water through the conveyance system.
Well, I'm just interested to know that, not trying to put you on the spot here, Jesse. I was hoping you wouldn't have to answer this, so anyway. The only reason I'm saying that's a 28,000 acre foot reservoir. That's a lot of water. I don't remember that. I operated that reservoir for 25 years. I don't remember those numbers. Not like that. Can you imagine how much that'd have to go down every day if you were just allowing for that? Well, the only reason I'm saying that so we can be more accurate on where we're going with this. To me, that would be easy to figure out. You know what your releases at LaGrange Dam are. You know where your diversion points are. You know what's at Modesto Reservoir at that point. And then you know how much the elevation goes down every day if you're not using one drop of water. You kind of know that in the off season anyway, because your reservoir goes down in the off season. So you kind of have an idea, ballpark figure. Am I correct in saying that?
So looking at this, I think it is shocking. It is surprising how much water is calculated as being seepage through the Modesto Reservoir. I think the challenge is, Dominic's right, went through a study, ag water management plan, identified a study that went through it. And I think absent of actually conducting a seepage study, which would be pretty costly, pretty challenging, I think what was intended to do is try to leverage studies that would take a reservoir similar conditions, but you're right, I think it's probably a conservative approach. But we'd have to really look into how it was truly developed and see if this, I'm sure this number, I'm sure there's probably a variance within it, but I think this is a good snapshot of where we started.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Fair enough. That's a fair enough answer. The concern would be if there was,
If it's way off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, and I'm just thinking through this right now, so maybe it's simply answered, but so there are, like one of the gentlemen said over here, with stream flows and pumping the underflow. I know there's appropriative users next to rivers who have, face value appropriation amount to divert. But then if they also have wells that are close to the river that are pumping the underflow, it's essentially, they're both coming from the river, right? Which is affecting the stream flow. Have you guys accounted for double counting that number, or do you consider it the same, or has it been thought about?
Yeah, so usually there are some general assumptions related to proximity to the river and dynamics, existing groundwater levels versus river stage and flow that we do take into consideration. But with that being said, one of the major components of our periodic evaluation for the GSP is to do a much more detailed analysis and evaluation related to stream depletions. And so right now what we do is we utilize existing groundwater levels adjacent to the river to make that assessment. But our goal is to develop a much more robust analysis over the next 6 months to be able to fine tune that number along with the rest of those. That's one of those data gaps I mentioned earlier.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dom. And then Eric, I was wondering, is OID planning on expanding their tenure? Because like according to this data, there is a need in non-district east that, you know, could be met with more surface water sales. Is that on the horizon or?
I haven't heard of any plan to do that yet. We have good participation right now, but we have a lot of people that aren't taking any more than the minimum at this point, and some aren't even taking the minimum they're supposed to take, and they're leaving water on the table. The other thing we're seeing is we have capacity constraints in the system, not only in the Paul cell, which we're working through this winter. We actually had the bids received here during this meeting, but we also have capacity constraints elsewhere in the system, like the South Main, for example, and the North Main. So we're going to try and make as much water available as possible, but right now we're not using up to the 25,000 acre feet that we had envisioned making available through the program. So there's no need to expand that acreage currently.
Gotcha. If there were growers in that area, because I know some of my neighbors are interested in joining it, and OID heard from them, would it be more likely to look into that, or?
Well, go ahead.
You know, no.
Yeah, so in the program currently, roughly we have a little under 10,000 acres, irrigated acres, I believe, and we have allotted 25,000 acre feet. So you would essentially be, if we put more people into the program, you'd be diluting the amount that you would make available to the current acreage that's in the program.
Yeah, I guess.
So I think I'd have, and we have a lot of interest.
I'm not saying necessarily like in the same tenure, but maybe like a tiered, you know, second version, right? For people who came later who weren't part of the 5-year. Is that?
I think as years go on, we'll think more about it, but there's not talk of doing that yet. We're still early in the program. We're in year 3, I believe. So we still have people that just got connected this year and are starting to take more water. So we're really kind of learning. But at some point, I think, you know, it's something we'll come back and discuss.
Yeah, I think that would be something to look into, just because, you know, I watched your presentation at the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Authority. You know, how you were saying there's a lot of surplus water around, I think, what, 50,000 acre feet at OID?
It depends on year.
Over the
Yeah, it
7 out
varies.
of 10 years that you get a full allocation. So you're saying OID uses 225,000 acre feet a year. But anyway, it's just something that I think we should all look into, because that could help. You know, it sounds like there's a lot of water that isn't being used that could be put to use in non-district east. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Yep.
And you guys are doing a great job with the Paul cell expansion.
Thank you.
Yeah. Many of us appreciate that expansion.
Thanks.
Eric, do you have 2 others on?
Okay. Yeah, if you want to. Yep.
Julia? Julia, can you unmute your mic? Excuse me.
Yes, thank you. Julia Berry. So I have 2 comments. I wanted to ask, so did I understand correctly, was there a comment that there's a suggestion to limit trading only within management areas, limit water trading only in management areas?
That is the preliminary suggestion, but it's something we're going to work through, and hopefully we'll bring back to you guys at our next meeting or next workshop.
Okay. Well, just an observation. So it seems like the description of the optimized allocation essentially, you know, spreads the water evenly, and seeing as the non-district east area is obviously greatly needed surface water, I think that, you know, we would advocate for the ability to move extra water from other areas, from other management areas where it's plentiful. So just a comment there. And then I wanted to return to that same slide that we keep looking at, the one that's the 3B summary of overlying water use, where it shows the suggested or preliminary allocations for the overlying area and the developed area. So I just wanted to make sure that we understand what is being identified as the sustainable yield or the overlying allocation as it relates to the developed area. So the chart indicates that the allocation is 1.19 acre feet. And then the gentleman speaking, I'm sorry, I don't remember your first name.
Dominic.
Thank you. You had made a kind of a passing comment that the allocation is just under 2 acre feet. So since there are a lot of growers in the room and those that are in areas that will have to either pay to pump more than the sustainable yield or the allocation or find a way to deliver additional surface water, could you help us understand what the number, if you know a number specifically, what the sustainable yield might be if the developed area is allocated based on this chart? Is it 1.19 or is it higher than that?
So if the GSA moves forward with allocating per the developed area, because you would use that acreage throughout it being developed, your allocation would be 1.19 acre feet per acre.
Okay, that's what I thought.
When it comes to the overlying area, the
Mhm.
approach again is we allocate a total volume of water to each of the management areas to do as they see fit, to bank it, to redistribute it. However, it's up to each of the management areas. And so this is the example where I had mentioned where per the recommendation that was given, was the idea was allocate per overlying area, but once to each of the areas, but then that area, an option could be that they could choose to give that allocation only to developed growers. And so in that case, you would be utilizing, for example, in the non-district east example that we had earlier, you'd be using the 44,000 acres that is 44,000 acre feet that's presented, but the management area could distribute that based on the developed acreage, which is the 24,000 you see in the top right. One of the reasons why I don't have a direct slide for that is because, again, it would be up to the stewards of that management area. And right now at the GSA level, that's not a decision that we're firmly making. So in this case, like as we talked about the non-district east, that would be a decision up to Stanislaus County and how they want to implement that program.
Okay, thank you. So said a different way, just as Eric indicated, allocating by overlying area actually benefits areas like the non-district east if the water is distributed to those who are currently using groundwater.
Correct. That's its intention.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if you take the 44,000 acre feet and you divide it by the 24,000 acres, that's 1.84 acre feet per acre. But you can see the required reduction is 45,000 acre feet. So it's about 50% if historical pumped based on our numbers.
Okay, thank you so much.
Dave Cameron. You can unmute your mic.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Dave Cameron, counsel for Stanislaus East Mutual Water Company. I appreciate you walking us all through the methodology today. It's clear you put a lot of thought into this, and I had questions on two topics, and both I think are captured on the allocation summary slide, which might be useful to pull up, which I think was that brown table. And the first question is with regard to, I believe, the methodology is called called appropriative uses, and it shows 18,900 acre feet being essentially taken off the top and exempted from the allocation methodology. So I was wondering if you could explain what that specific use is and why it's being considered an appropriative right. And then I have another question on another topic, but I'll pause there.
Sure. So at least to hit your first topic, so appropriative users in that table is appropriative use beyond the municipal users, right? So in general, appropriative use is traditionally an agency that does not use a volume of water itself. For example, municipality, right, the city of Modesto pumps, and it gives it to individual, its customers. Similar to the municipality, Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District are appropriative users. And so in this case, since we've already exempted the municipal users, the appropriative use that is partaking in the program is Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District. They operate groundwater production wells that then feed into their conveyance systems and is delivered as surface water. And so in this case, I want to be clear that they're not, though that appropriative use is not exempt. What we did is we looked at their historical use and we reduced that historical use proportional to any landowner receiving an overlying allocation. And that's related to this figure here. So in this case here, we have the historical non-special classes. And so those non-special classes are both MID, OID's appropriative use, as well as any of the overlying production. And so all of those users are jointly reduced by 35% to 65% of their historical use. And so that's where this comes from, is that 174,000, which was the target, is putting into two separate buckets, one for overlying use and one for a reduced historical use. And so I believe their historical use is a little over 25,000, maybe 28,000. And that number is reduced to approximately 19,000 acre feet, similar to overlying users.
Okay, well, maybe I'll ask it a little differently. Is that use overlying ag use, or is that municipal use, or is that a different use? I'm trying to get a sense of what the end use is.
The appropriative?
Yeah, as you're calling the appropriative 18,900.
Yeah, so the appropriative use in here is water that is, it's effectively water that is pumped by Modesto or Oakdale Irrigation District, put into their conveyance systems and delivered to their customers, in this case, which are predominantly agricultural users.
Okay. The second question I had is with regard to the developed water use, and this touches on the Modesto Reservoir 23,600. So as I understand under the methodology, the methodology essentially allows Modesto Irrigation District to recover that amount in full with no diminution, no leave behind, no reduction. Is that right?
Yes.
And their extraction facilities for that are their own district wells within their service area? Is that correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that additional explanation. I appreciate it.
Yes. Mike Day, was that? Yes, let's do Mike. Mike Day, unmute your mic, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have a number of comments. First of all, I want to commend the consultants and the GSA reps for listening and incorporating input that they've received so far. I love how simple this is, keeping it simple. I do think we need a little bit more time to be able to submit some formal responses to what we see. It would be nice to have another week to be able to submit some written comments and make sure that we're on target with those. I don't think this is a paradigm shift at all. I think this was really the plan all along. But anyway, I'm not going to quibble. I would like to see more on the groundwater monitoring program, the data gaps filling plan. We've heard about it, but we haven't seen that in writing yet. It would be nice to see that in writing and be able to look at it. There's talk about a groundwater extraction fee in this presentation, but there are no details. And so we would like to hear some more about that. There's some use of some words, triggers, impacts, or conditions. in your slides that really aren't Sigma terms. So you may want to correct that. And then, but I think wanted to talk about on the recovery of developed supply. We've commented before that there are some use of surface water and spill water that has not really been incorporated into the model yet, particularly in the non-district west, where there's riparian and appropriated water that just doesn't seem to be accounted for properly. There's spill water, and so we would like to see that be improved over time. Within Modesto ID, this proposal actually sets up some ag versus urban users, as it seems to treat them all equally with respect to whether they use surface water or not. It seems only fair that those who are currently using surface water should not be curtailed in favor of those who have chosen not to invest in the pumps and the filter stations to be able to filter surface water and are pumping only groundwater, or the cities that are not treating surface water. That should be the focus, and I think within the Modesto ID management area, that would be something to discuss. MID certainly needs to find a way to reduce groundwater pumping. That isn't essential for shallow groundwater protection. Some of it is. There's too much pumping in normal and wet years. Need to find a better way to regulate the canal system and turning wells on and off. I think they can work on that. There's precious little detail in this, how it's all gonna unfold here. For instance, how groundwater use will actually be monitored. I think there was some mention about continuing to use remote sensing. But anyway, would like to see some more details. I'd like to have a little bit more time and give our district some more time to develop exactly how they're gonna work within their management area. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Hi, now.
Hey.
Unmute your mic, please.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just had a couple questions. In terms of historical use, is that over the time period that was mentioned, the 20, I think it was 2014 to 2024, is that correct?
2015 to 2024.
Okay. Okay. In terms of the developed area versus total area, what is considered developed area? Like, for example, if you have a farm that's only in transition, where you've pulled trees and you're, maybe leaving it fallow for a couple of years before replanting, is that considered part of the originally developed area that was irrigated? I assume so, given the time period of 2015 to 24. Is that correct?
Yeah, this analysis is developed effectively any acreage that has ever been utilized for irrigated crops is considered a developed area.
Understood. Okay. And the other thing I wanted to ask was, is there when you look at extracted water versus consumptive use, how are you accounting for water that essentially would not be used by the trees or the plants, wouldn't be evaporated, but would potentially, leak into the groundwater basin due to leaching? Is there a credit for that, or how does that get accounted for?
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. If I understand your question correctly, you're effectively asking, what do we do with the deep percolation of applied water? If that's is that?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so effectively, we're doing an allocation on total pumping, but one of the major things that we want to do in order to not have to send on the cost of adding a meter to every single well is to at least initially look at the idea of looking at remote sensing and at either a management area level, and then allow growers to, if they feel that the remote sensing does not adequately assess their use, that they can put in a meter and provide that data to the GSA separately. But effectively then, to directly address your question, the idea is to take a look at a combination of irrigation methodology, crop type, water supply, and soil type to make a assumption as to what your either irrigation efficiency is, or at least an estimate for deep percolation.
Understood. And then how about precipitation? How does that impact the calculus?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
How does precipitation get factored in?
So at least based on kind of the initial analysis, precipitation, particularly in the early months, traditionally in the spring, an estimate for demand is is that so precipitation occurs, some fraction of that is infiltrated, some runs off, and that infiltration then goes into basically the root zone as a form of storage, and that water is available for crops in our modeling during kind of the early irrigation season. So it would effectively account for your demand. When we take a look at the remote sensing and implement this, we would probably take a similar approach, potentially probably on a monthly time scale to be able to look at an estimate for infiltration and effective use of that precipitation.
So in other words, that infiltration, the rainwater infiltration would provide some of the consumptive demand of the plant that would not come from the actual allocation, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Hi, Amir.
Hi, I'm Imani from EKI Environmental War again. Not to repeat, but again, thank you for giving the opportunity. I want to go back to the same slide by the developed area and overlying area, if we could. As this was presented, the municipal allocation was taken off the top before reaching this level. So my question is, why is the entire area still being considered for allocation? Shouldn't we remove the areas associated with the municipalities because we already allocated water to them? Isn't that gonna lead to double, for the lack of a better word, double dipping into allocation in those areas by the management areas? Because they have their own water now already off the top. Now we're focused on the remainder. So the allocation should focus on the remainder.
Right, so there's two reasons for that. One is that, as SGMA can regulate, but it cannot remove water rights. Even if you are an individual landowner within the city and you receive appropriative water, you do not give up your access to that right. You still have a right to it, even if you do not exercise that right. I would compare this fairly analogous to the idea of being able to provide water to users in some of the rangeland that we had, or that undeveloped acreage, right? So there's a balance of the two. We have developed acreage, which is really focused. Another word for the developed area could be irrigated acreage, right? And that's active agricultural farmland. On the other hand, when we looked at overlying area, the idea of completely undeveloped land, or people who have, kind of your house within a city, it is developed, but you're not exercising that use, right? And so we are treating those semi-equivalently. And so that way, effectively, that same idea is that it gets sent to the steward, and they get to distribute it to their growers that are actively using their overlying right.
I'm sorry, but you have already decided to give that right to them by that amount that was allocated. And based on my calculation, it is more than would have been allocated as an overlying right. So this just allocates twice to the same area. I know, but you're not removing any right. You already gave them a right, more than the overlying right. This is now you're allocating the remainder to the other overlying users. I don't think that counts as removing their rights. I think it's just double counting their allocation.
Is there a question to that, or if not, thank you for your comment.
No, that wasn't a question. It's just I'm wondering why that's being done. If there's other reason, because I don't think the removal of right is happening if you already allocated more than their overlying allocation to them.
So effectively, right, so effectively the reasons, that's why we're presenting both options here, right, is that on one hand, we're looking at only irrigated acreage, and on the other hand, we're treating every acre across the entire subbasin equally, whether you're irrigated, whether you're a user of an appropriative use, that you're not exercising your overlying use, or whether you're irrigated appropriative user or just a dormant user within the basin. So all acreage is either treated equally, or we can focus our attention in giving it only to the developed acreage. Those are the two options that we have presented. And so it's up to, this feedback and ultimately up to the GSA, whether, which of these two options they would like to proceed with.
So when we're talking about the appropriative rights, we're talking about the rights to the district, the rights the district has for the historical use of public groundwater for the district, not for the landowner's overlying rights that are within the boundaries of the district. So those are two distinctly different things, right?
Correct.
So that's why we're not double dipping.
Yes.
Right.
Hi, Bill Lyons, and the gentleman that just spoke tweaked my interest in the back. And if the steward, the county, makes a decision to transfer those rights to the developed area, will then the ones who their right has been taken away, will they be charged a management fee?
So in general, I just want to be careful with the terminology of rights versus an allocation, because the GSA or any of its member agencies do not have an ability to change anyone's right to water. I think as far as implementation of fees, I think that would ultimately be up to the stewards or the GSA to determine how that's implemented. I believe we also had a comment earlier on the phone asking about, why haven't we been talking about the details of things like fees, the adaptive management, response actions, things to that effect. And I promise it's coming. We're hoping to dive into all those details at our next meeting. As you can see, I think we're already 45 minutes over our this meeting's schedule. And so I promise that information is coming. We'll dive into it in greater detail. But there's so much content here. I can't get it all done in one meeting.
Christy, I was going to mention that the California Cattlemen's Association has entered kind of a situation where they're challenging some of the fees that are being implemented to cattlemen that have never used their pumped water. So maybe that's something just to consider. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else in the room? Last shot. All right. All good feedback. Thank you very much. I think I'll give you guys a shot to say something too here if you want to recap anything or have any last thoughts. I don't think there's any big surprises here. I think, we kind of knew the non-district east was one of the bigger ones that would take the hit. I think by stepping in and taking a stepped approach and looking at real data in the field, I think that's a good way to go about it. This is a lot of work to get to this point, so I've heard comments from landowners in the non-district east to date, and really what they're looking for is a number that they need to work with. So this is a big step in getting us to that point. These are draft numbers, they're not final numbers, but at least it's something that we can all work with, digest, chew on, and get feedback to the GSA. So it's important that everybody gets a chance to sleep on this a little bit and then provide their comments. In the meantime, I'd also want to make sure that all the committee members up here on the GSA are all communicating this information to their respective boards and councils. If you need help doing that, I can help you. Remember, this was all recorded, so they can go back and watch this recording, and that's probably the easiest thing and best way for them to get familiar with it. So take advantage of that. Any other closing thoughts on item 3 before we move on from the member agencies?
Again, just want to say thank you to Dominic. I think he's done a really great job on it. Woodard Curran and Todd Groundwater. And I just would also like to express that, you know, this is providing the framework. So this is the first step of presenting, here's the data, this is what we're looking at. There are some assumptions that are put into this. It does draw some questions, I think, to Director Byrd's point. You know, on Modesto Reservoir, that's a seepage number that came out that you off firsthand, you're like, wow, that's a pretty significant number. Now it's our part to really start looking into a lot of these details, start vetting it through, and I think be mindful of all this information that's being provided to us, but analyze it and then work as a GSA collectively to figure out, okay, how accurate are these assumptions, and let's start fine tuning it to the best solutions possible.
Yeah, I also wanted to extend my thanks not only to Woodard and Curran and Todd Groundwater for taking the time to do this for us. It's definitely a tall task, so I commend them for the level of effort they put into it, but also for the members of the public in general, taking the time to just ask valid questions and poke around at it. Hopefully, the overall takeaway from this is that this is a good faith effort that's going on between all the sides here. I mean, I think at least at the initial first pass, you definitely see that when you see the way we're proposing the overlying area approach, which generally gives a bigger bucket of water, and then even start talking about the credit trading, and then even, you know, at the end of the day, it'll be at the discretion of the management areas, but even the suggestion that there's going to be unused water that could be redistributed, I think that's kind of things that have been brought up at past GSA board meetings, especially from the non-district east side, trying to find a way to really work together collaboratively on this. So I definitely think it's a step in the right direction.
Anyone else? All right, good job, Dominic. Thank you very much. That wraps up item number 3. Item number 4 is next meeting. So the next workshop is yet to be determined. Likely the next workshop will be on revisiting the well mitigation plan, trying to get that out in the public for review. So we're looking forward to getting that done and rolling. August 13th at 1:30 at OID is our next GSA meeting, so I encourage you to attend. We'll be talking more about budget, 2026 budget, amongst other things. I think we'll also be likely talking about fall 2025, or sorry, spring 2025 water levels. Comments or questions from the member agencies on the next meeting?
So there's no, I mean, we have enough time to review and provide feedback regarding the content that was shared today. We've got a couple months. There's no
Yeah, I'd say
deadline or anything.
ideally sooner the better, but yeah, there's no defined timeline right now.
Okay.
Yep. Want to give all the member agencies a chance to go back to their councils and boards, so that's probably going to take a month in and of itself. And that's another opportunity for people to provide public feedback as well.
Do you think we're going to be looking at updating approval its sections as the framework further evolves, or are we going to take as a whole package to our boards when it's all complete?
I think we'll probably have to do increments along the way, but I'm not definitive on that either right now.
Or maybe increments and then the whole thing again for the end of the year?
Possible. Good question. Anyone else? Like for the GSP?
Yeah.
We weren't envisioning that. I think we're continuing to get public input along the way, but yeah, we're open to see suggestions there. Yeah, no, there's nothing required. This is just a process to try and make sure it's transparent and we get as much input as possible while still meeting our deadline, what we committed to, yeah. Any public comment on the next meeting or the next workshop? Any online? All right, thank you. Item number 5, are there any committee comments or reports? We had our closing of the bid process for the pole cell lateral expansion today. Low bid was 10 million and roughly 10 million. The highest bid, we got 3 bids. The highest bid was 12.3 something, and I have to look back at my text. But that's good news. So we got a $14.4 million grant, and $4 million went towards the tunnels last year, so we're pretty close to where our target was. So that's real good news. All right, with that, we'll call the workshop adjourned. Thank you very much for everybody's attendance and time. Appreciate it.